Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining me here today. My name is Nick Talamelli. I'm going to give you a little bit of breakdown about financing your education, whether you're an undergraduate student, graduate student, what you may be ultimately going through the process, all the finances that surround a higher education experience. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. First and foremost to start, I'm Nick Talamelli. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Juno. And essentially what Juno is, we're an independent third party. We sit on top of every major international lending agency to ensure that students and families are getting lower interest rates, a much more higher, affordable higher education experience, and going through this entire process as well. And of course, we're a completely free resource with no obligations. My background, stems from higher education. I actually used to run business development for the Princeton Review, predominantly assisting all undergrads and grads on getting into colleges and universities around the globe. So that was my background. Noticed a lot of inequalities throughout all of education. So that's all ultimately what led me to be employee number one here at Juno. So I'm going to share my slides. Again, any questions, please put them in the chat wherever you feel most comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions at any point in time, please feel free to send me an email, a note, whatever works best within your particular situation, and I'm happy to help every single step of the way. So let me share and just make sure that everybody can actually see my screen. Okay. Now, can everybody see my screen? Hopefully, yes. Cool. So again, we're going to be talking today about financing your education. Thank you again for Fiable for having us today. This is really an honor, and it's going to be great to speak with everybody and get some pretty good questions going through this process. Again, of course, reach out to thanks again to Fiable and all that they do and all the work that they provide. These are wonderful resources, top to bottom, from all these presentations. So we'll get right into some of the nitty-gritty details. When you're an undergraduate student, there's going to be a lot of different things that you're going to have to cover in time. There's plenty of different student loan options. There's scholarship options. There's financial aid packages from these schools and universities. And parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, whoever are involved in this process, it's usually a pretty, I'd say, strict process for a lot of folks. And it's a pretty new process for a lot of folks. My parents, I was the first child to go to college. They were completely unsure of what the right steps and what the right actions were. Ultimately, they wound up making some decisions on some of the different student loan options that were out there, some of which could have wound up being pretty negatively impacting what my financial future might look like. So my advice to everybody, have this conversation early and often when it comes to the price of your higher education experience. So there's a few different types of student loans that are out there. And we'll cover a little bit piece by piece. We'll cover some of these a little bit more in depth. And then, of course, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about scholarship opportunities, what's out there, and I can make some recommendations. A lot of this, though, I want to be very interactive, so ask as many questions as you like. We have your direct subsidized loans first and foremost to start. This is eligible for all undergraduates who demonstrate that financial need. You'll have your direct unsubsidized loans, which will be for eligible undergraduates and graduate students, but it's not based on that financial need. You'll have your direct plus loans. So for your undergraduate students or soon to be undergraduate students, this would be the parent plus loan. For grad students, it's called the grad plus loan. It's for grad, professional students, parents of dependent undergrads. Eligibility is not actually based off of financial need, but it's more of a credit requirement. So if folks are noticing these gaps after your direct unsubsidized and your direct subsidized loans, then you'll ultimately come into contact with what's historically been the plus loan options. And then, of course, last but not very least, you have private student loan options that are in there as well. For graduate students, professional grad students, there are going to be some credit requirements that are surrounding this. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles can all be eligible co-signers as long as they're valid here within the United States. So plenty of different options and opportunities that are out there. So when it comes to financing your education, there's a few things that we want to advise folks early and often. Check out the school's website. Every school is actually going to publish a cost of attendance figure. The financial aid website, they're going to send you a real thick packet, or at least that's what I did when I'm a dinosaur now, unfortunately, but that's what they'll send to you. They'll include estimates for singles, couples. If you have a family and you're a non-traditional student, then they're going to provide all these different opportunities for you. And now I think it's all online, and they'll send you basically a giant packet, but in a PDF form. And that's how you'll be able to explore all the different options that are out there. We want all students, regardless of how old you are, whether you are a sophomore in high school, junior, senior, current college student, current grad student, apply for FAFSA and as many scholarships and external opportunities that you possibly can. Most schools will have a few external scholarships that people have applied for in the past. We can recommend you Career One Stop. Our website at joinjuno.com has a full scholarship database as well. Take advantage of all those different opportunities that are in there. You can apply for as many as you like. Any free money that you can get is beneficial, and it's always good money. So as long as the money's green, it's going to be beneficial for financing your education. When you first get your student loan, or your student loan, your financial aid award letter from schools and universities, think of it as a rough draft. When you write your 5-paragraph essays, you're going to create an outline, rough draft, and then go back and make your final edits or your finishing edits. Think of your financial aid award letter from the school or university in the same exact kind of capacity. It always helps if you get into a multitude of different schools, because then ultimately you can say, hey, I got into school A, I really want to go to school B, I'm going to compare the two. And ultimately, if they find out, they're going to be competing for you as a student and as an individual at the end of each day. Now, if you're one of those individuals like myself who wound up applying to like 20 schools, you don't want to do this with all 20 schools because it will take time, and it's a lot of effort that goes into each and every one of these. And if you're just comparing a small handful of schools together, you should be able to make some headway with them. Schools cannot, and they will not, rescind any of your acceptance letters just because you ask for more financial need or help or scholarships. And sometimes they may not even give you anything. They may say, oh, you know what, really can't offer any more in the way of scholarships, but what we can do is give you a job on campus. You're going to be swiping people into the gym or doing something along those lines to help make ends meet. So some of the tips that we typically like to tell folks in asking for more financial aid: be selective about who you're asking, when you're asking. Make sure that you really want to go to that program. If you're applying to your safety school and you're asking for more financial aid and you've gotten into 6 other schools, it might not be worth your time and your effort to go back and ultimately go through that entire process. Again, it helps if you've gotten into more than one school, so you can actually choose more aid, what it may ultimately look like, so you can see the overall financial picture. It may go to the director of financial aid office. It may go to admissions. It may go to enrollment. There's a multitude of different ways. Each university will have a pretty clear direction of where you can ask for more financial aid. And again, last but not least, wherever you've been accepted, they won't change your mind. So ask for more help. Always ask, and that's each and every year that you're in school as well. Some of the terms that are commonly misconstrued when it comes to student loans as well: parents, undergraduate parents, students themselves, current undergraduate students, definitions of what like a fixed or a variable rate may be. So a variable rate essentially means that student loan interest rate can fluctuate up or down over the course of what your repayment period is, dependent on what the market tells them. Whereas fixed rates, which are most commonly taken out in all of student loans, will stay the same throughout the entire duration. Federal student loans will offer a 10-year student loan fixed rate, where variable rates can come into play for private student loans. They could be potentially lower than these fixed rates, but like I said previously before, they can go up and down. So we advise people to do their due diligence every single step of the way when they're going through this process. I'd say about 90% of people will actually wind up utilizing fixed rates just because it's easier to predict. So when your monthly payment comes after graduation, you know exactly where you'll be lined up each and every day. So I'll go over some of what the pros and cons may ultimately look like for both federal and for private student loans, because that comparison is going to be really crucial throughout that entire process. Federal student loans, so your federal Stafford loans, will come with, likely as an undergraduate student, the lowest interest rates, but it's common that students will typically need to borrow more than what the federal limit allows. So in your first year, you only get $5,500 from the federal government. Most of these schools and universities now range from $40,000 a year to the highest I've ever heard personally was $78,000 a year for a particular institution. So that's where that gap comes into play. Now, private student loan options, the Parent Plus loan options are going to be out there for most folks. Parent Plus loans are going to be directly correlated and related to, through quote unquote the federal government, but they're not actually the best loans for people in their particular circumstances. You will have some federal protections with all federal student loans that are going to be crucial. And then, of course, with the private student loans, you won't have those federal protections. So, for example, pretty morbid to think about, but if you pass away and you have a federal student loan, your student loan is forgiven. Also, things like COVID, we had the 0% interest rates that were extended recently until the end of January. That's another caveat within the student loans that are the federal student loans that are really beneficial for a lot of folks. Private student loans are typically best used in lieu of what the financial need may be. So these could be better and often are better than what the Parent Plus loan are. Typically for this coming academic year in 2021 to 2022, it's going to be a 6.28% interest rate with a 4.248 origination fee, which is typically more expensive than what the private loan may ultimately cost folks. The private student loan does not have any origination fee. Origination fee, essentially what that is, on top of what the loan amount is that you're going to ultimately be borrowing, they add 4.248, and that's just a flat fee that is covered through the federal government that you'll ultimately wind up having to pay. Could make your private student or your federal student loan option, rather, be much more expensive than what some of the private student loan options may ultimately look like. Some of the other fees that are going to be out there when it comes to overall student loans and student lending as it stands today, application fees. Typically, these are very outdated. Federal student loans, typically no fees. Private student loans, there's typically no fee, but sometimes there are lenders and little banks and credit unions that may ask for one. This should be an immediate red flag. So have that conversation early with friends, family, parents, whatever it may be. Typically an application fee, just a fee charged by a lender to apply for the loan. Now, this is a big one that a lot of folks ultimately come into contact with, say if they make more money or they're ultimately going through this suitable situation, prepayment penalties. So if you sign a student loan for a 10-year clip, typically they will count on you as a customer or a member of their business for 10 years. So anytime that you can pay the loan back sooner, you may have to ultimately pay a prepayment penalty. So basically what it is a fee that you have to pay back on your loan ahead of the predetermined schedule. So when you graduate, you become a lower credit risk essentially, and you may be able to refinance your student loans at a lower cost. Make sure that your loan has no prepayment penalty so you can refinance with a much easier time. Very few lenders still use this. It was very popular 10, 15, 20, even 30 years ago, but some are still out there that are still utilizing a prepayment penalty. Avoid it whenever you possibly can. Now back to that origination fee that we talked about a little bit earlier as well. Typically that origination fee is a fee charged by a lender when you first take out that new student loan. Federal government, as it stands today, is charging a 4.248 origination fee for the Parent Plus loans. And our partner basically through us here at Juno, undergraduate families will not have any origination fees. So this could ultimately mean the difference between thousands of dollars that you're spending on your education each and every year. You do typically take out student loans a year at a time as well. So that's something to keep into consideration as well when you're going through this process. Most folks, it's a common misconception, think that you borrow all 4 years in advance, or some people get confused with graduate school programs and think that they borrow for the duration of graduate school. Maybe you want to go to law, medical, dental. It's only a year at a time. And the reason that they do that, because your financial aid situation can change from a semester at a time, from a year at a time. You could win the lottery, and ultimately you won't have to take out any more student loans ever again. Obviously, we all wish that could happen, but there's plenty of different opportunities that continually will arise throughout this entire process. So just to give you some facts and figures, this is the current student loan debt total in the United States as it stands today. This number grows incrementally each and every day, unfortunately. So it's important to do a lot of the financial research, the education throughout every single step in the process before you become part of this number. I, unfortunately, am a part of this number through both my undergraduate and my graduate school degree. I found myself being in, right now, as it stands today, about $14,000 in student loan debt. So not the end of the world, not a large amount. There are certainly many people out there with much larger amounts that are really struggling throughout this entire process. But the goal is to not be part of this number. We know, unfortunately, about 90% of Americans wind up taking out new student loans in some kind of capacity. But it's really managing that risk. And ultimately, is that the right choice for me financially, academically? There's a litany of different decisions that come into that process as well. So again, who Juno is, basically we're a completely free resource, no obligations to take out a new student loan or refinance. Essentially what we do is we organize giant groups of students, go to these banks, credit unions, and lending companies, and essentially make sure that they're not taking advantage of you with any of these crazy fees, that they're giving you the lowest interest rates possible to make sure that higher education is a much more affordable landscape, and going through this entire process. So essentially we started as the two co-founders, Chris and Nikhil, met at Harvard Business School, very expensive institution. And ultimately they just got 700 of their classmates across many different schools, including Harvard Business School, to negotiate lower interest rates. And it has been successful ever since. We've worked with about 75,000 folks to this point, and are continually helping more and more folks each year. We've been around for just about 3 years now. Again, completely free resource, no obligations at any point in time. Our goal is to get you the lowest private student loan interest rates, most favorable terms, to have a much more affordable higher education experience, because let's face it, schools and universities are still continually going up in price. So that's predominantly our goal, and that's our mission. Again, any questions at all, please feel free to reach out any point in time. Our primary goal is to walk you through as much of the process as possible. There's going to be things in there like schools and universities recommend that you have spending money for some of your off-campus quote unquote expenses. There's going to be hidden expenses. Do you have to buy new sets of textbooks, laptops going throughout this entire process? Access codes are becoming more and more increasingly popular than those books are. So there's a litany of different information that comes into there. You have to take it with what you feel is going to be comfortable within your financial situation. We have some schools and universities that recommend students take out or make at least $8,000 for their full school year, and how much ultimately they're looking to spend in terms of excess costs. And then there's some schools and universities that are conservative in that number, and they'll say $2,000 will get you across the entire academic school year. Excuse me. So again, any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat here. You could email us again at Fiveable. Thank you again for hosting this event. You can email me directly, nick@joinjuno.com. We're here every single step of the way. We can go from, filling out the FAFSA form all the way throughout the process, what you may look like. Filling out the FAFSA is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Releases every year around the October timeframe. It's been a little quirky the past couple of years with COVID and everything along those lines on when people are actually filling it out. But typically, most families will fill that out every single year to determine what they are eligible for in terms of their financial and need-based aid. And then after that is then when all the other student loan options will come into play. So again, if you need anything at any point in time, feel free to reach out to us at any point. We can walk you through every single step, whether you are really early to the process and you're a sophomore right now, or you are that junior and senior that's getting ready and getting geared up for college, ready to have that conversation with mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, family members, whoever it may ultimately be throughout your collegiate process. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen here now, and I will pan over to see what kind of questions are actually going to be coming in the chat, and we'll be able to go through what the next steps in the process may be as well. Again, feel free to ask whatever questions. You could ask me questions about my personal experience in higher education, some of the questions about personal finance, student loans, people, are they spending money at colleges and universities? What does that typically look like? And going from there. But no rush. And again, if you have any questions, you can, and you don't feel comfortable asking them out loud or me answering them out loud at the very least, feel free to send me a message at any point in time. So we had the first question that actually just funneled through. What is the earliest time we should start preparing financial aid applications? So the earliest time that you should just start for preparing for financial aid applications is the moment that you're filling out the FAFSA forms and you have a list of schools and universities. You should really pull all of this information together as soon as you possibly can. Because the earlier that you actually pull all of this information together, the more streamlined it's going to be, because financial aid offices, if you're working with admissions departments, they have a lot of other students that they're trying to handle at the same exact time. So it may be a little bit difficult for them if you are cutting it really close at the end of the spectrum. Next question is it too early to prepare as a sophomore? Never too early. We have folks in our process that are joining us now, and their children are actually in middle school. They maybe have used us for graduate school. I advise everybody and anybody to sign up as early as you possibly can throughout this process, to really do the due diligence, learn a little bit more, because student loans do change from year over year. So if there are any things coming up along those lines, I'd start the process as early as possible, because typically junior and senior year, they come and they're done like this. You'll be applying for colleges, you'll be doing scholarship applications. So being prepared about what financial aid applications may look like, the earlier, the better. So let's see. Next question that just popped up here as well. Let me just check that there's no other questions that are coming through this point. Is there a way to negotiate with college admissions on financial aid? Absolutely. So anytime you get accepted to a university and you're trying to decide between school 1 to school 2 to school 3, you can actually apply for more financial aid in a litany of different ways. Could be through scholarships, could be through work study, which means that they give you a job on campus and it's part of your financial aid award package. It could be outside of school opportunities and job opportunities. It could be more academic money. So if you're a really strong academic student, you get into a multitude of different schools. School 1, school 2, school 3, they all really want you to come to their institution. And they're all going to try to figure out what the right price point is to ultimately get you to come to their institution. So you can always negotiate. Typically, you'll write a financial aid appeal letter. We actually have some resources on our website that are very valuable for students going through that process. Take advantage of that. There's plenty of different ways and avenues that you can negotiate. Personally, I negotiated each and every year for what my financial aid award letter was. Some years I got more in academic standing and academic money. Other years I got that financial aid in terms of the work study, and I was able to swipe people in the gym. I was able to work on campus and get on-campus housing for free. Whatever it may be, it's a really big cost savings for a lot of people going through that process as well. Next question that just came in. when do students typically apply for private loans if they ultimately need them? So students will typically apply for private student loans once they actually get their financial aid award letters from schools and universities. So most commonly, people will get accepted into their universities. Typically, that's like that March timeframe. That's really excitement starts to come out. Some of those are early acceptance that you'll even hear earlier than that, early decision programs. So typically people will apply anywhere from like February 1st all the way until the end of the season, which would be like the end of August, going through this process. So the earlier, the better that you can apply for these things. Obviously, you don't have to take action right away and take out a new student loan if you fill out all your information now, but it's a helpful practice to start figuring out what the financial picture is going to look like for you if you were to go to institution 1 versus institution 2. So typically that time frame, the most conducive, most people will actually take out their new student loans from like May 1st to the end of August, because that's when tuition bill due dates ultimately arise. So question here, do I have to fill out both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and is there an order to do so? If so. So no order to do so. Each university is going to recommend what they have. I'd say most commonly people will fill out the FAFSA and then the CSS profile. Get it done as soon as you possibly can. The moment that it's released, if you're a senior, take advantage of that opportunity. So it's coming up right now, August, excuse me. My brain's a million different directions. October 1st. It'll be here before you know it. Fill out that FAFSA form, the CSS profile, start building up your resume, everything along those lines, because you want to be early to the party. You don't want to necessarily be filling out all this information and scrambling just in case anything goes awry. So filling out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, some schools want both, some will want one or the other. Typically, most commonly, the FAFSA is the best place to start for most folks. So another great question. This is actually my favorite question, one of my favorite questions that I've heard in a couple weeks now. What are the rules of thumb to recommend students determining how much student loan debt you can afford? So I could talk to you until I'm blue in the face on a couple of different opportunities, but more or less, you're going to compare schools and universities. I think a lot of students, and I was guilty of this as well, I had my dream schools all in order. I had sweatshirts at all of the schools. I went based off of what my favorite athletic programs were. I was going to be an athlete myself, and ultimately didn't care too much about what the financial ramifications may ultimately look like down the line for somebody like myself and what my major was going to be. When I applied to all these schools, my major was similar, but it was slightly different in a couple of different capacities. So you're going to want to determine what the outcome or what your desired job may be. And this is going to change, I'm sure, for a lot of people going through school or university. A lot of people go through major changes. They lose passion in what they're studying. They can go for a different route. What the end goal may ultimately be. For example, I was a dual major. I was in finance, and then I was in sports management. I thought I was going to own the Boston Red Sox at one point. That is my favorite baseball team, so please don't be too harsh on me about that. But more or less, that was my goal. What did it take to get there? I knew I needed to be in business of sorts. Sports management was a great realm because I was getting sports exposure and going through this entire process. And what could I ultimately do to take that? Shortly after that point, my first couple of years went through, had a bunch of internships in professional sports and collegiate sports. I came to find out that was not going to be an achievable dream for myself. Okay, now I had the business to fall back on. Sports were great. They were a passion of mine, but was it going to be my future? And then ultimately, I went back to school and I got my MBA directly after my personal experience as well. So I did an accelerated 18-month program, and then ultimately led me into education, which was something that I found a passion for while I was going through this process. Rule of thumb, there are no rules of thumb typically when you're going through this process, but to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt to ultimately wind up potentially being an art history major or working in fields where there's no immediate job path might be a little bit more of a challenge. People will take out massive student loan debts if they want to go into MBA programs, law school, medical school, dental school. We're seeing a lot of people around the medical field that are starting to get into higher and higher student loan debt totals. That's because typically they know that upon graduation, I'll be able to get a job in my field. I'll be able to make some stuff happen. And then I'm hoping that the salary will be there ultimately to make that balance happen. So that's crucial throughout that step in the process. What I tell all of students and families and parents that I consult and that I work with to really sit down and have this conversation with whoever is going to be going through the undergraduate experience with you. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, cousins, family members, family friends, whoever it may ultimately be. Does it make sense to go to a private institution where I'm going to be taking out $25,000 in a student loan every single year for 4 years, and then I have to go to graduate school after that? Or does it ultimately make more sense for me to go to a public university, potentially save a little bit of money, maybe work while I'm going to school continuously as well, so I can lower that student loan debt total? So there's preferences. Most people will have their own financial preferences. It depends the type of family that you grow up in. It depends on a litany of different information going through that entire process. So you can take on as much student loan debt totals as you possibly can. I've heard as high as $437,000 in student loan debt. And I've heard of little as no student loan debt at all, or maybe $1,000 total. So it really depends on what your financial picture looks like, the schools and the universities. I've always been a firm believer. You can go to a top 25 school and university. The opportunities will be out there. It's what you make most of those opportunities that can get you to the next level. It's all about what's within yourself. So that's my perspective. Sorry to get a little bit deep with that last line there, but that's where I think most people get confused. And I was one of those individuals as well. My dream school I wanted to go to was $74,000 a year. I didn't get a lick of financial aid. And I made the decision to go to another university, even though I was super excited to go to one particular university. So it wound up being fantastic. I met some of my lifelong friends. I got to know really great professors. I had a great internship program where I got to do a lot of learning. And that's what's most important is experience once you get into your career and into your field. So again, continually learn around you. That's going to be a really helpful resource. So great question here. Is FAFSA and CSS profiles applicable for international students? So typically for international students, the process is going to be a little bit different. They may have you fill out some of these informational pieces, but unlike the US domestic student, the international student is going to be going a completely different route. Your options, unfortunately, as an international student are going to be a little bit less than what the typical traditional US domestic student may look like. We do help out international students here at Juno going through this process and helping out, taking out new student loans. There are scholarship opportunities that are certainly available to international students as well. But again, your school or universities that you're particularly applying to or you're planning on going to will direct you on what to fill out. Typically, they have you fill out everything in between. Cool. So I think those are some great questions. Any other questions that may be available for folks? I'll be on here for another minute or so. So it looks like there's no other questions. Again, if you need anything at all, please feel free to reach out at any point in time. We're happy to assist in any way, shape, or form. You can reach me directly here at nick@joinjuno.com. Thank you again, Fiveable, for hosting this wonderful presentation series. I think there's a lot of valuable resources that students will be able to achieve from this, and it's hopefully opening this conversation early and often with students, parents, families that are going through this process. It's very exciting. There's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of applications. There's a lot of filling out seemingly repetitive information. But resources like ours and some of the other resources that are out there are going to help steer you in the right direction. So even if you took a small tidbit of what you learned today with you moving forward and me chatting your ear off for about 40 minutes now, let me know if I could provide you with any other information. Happy to walk you through each and every step away of the process, and we'll be able to go from there. Thanks again. I appreciate everybody, and take care.